everyone. I'm Patty Mulvihill. I'm the Executive Director for the League of Oregon Cities. Thank you for joining us today for the weekly legislative webinar, and thanks for being accommodating and starting at 1:30 today. Mayor Steve Calloway, LOC's president this year, and I just finished up a small cities regional meeting in Madras, which is where I'm joining you from today. That city was kind enough to give us some room. Some quick reminders. I think almost everybody is muted, but if you haven't, please make sure that you keep your microphone muted unless you're specifically asked by LOC staff to turn it off. We will hold questions until we finish the update from all LOC lobbyists. But when it's time for questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and also feel free to raise your Zoom hand and we'll call on you. When taking questions, please remember we will always start with LOC members first before we go to members of the general public. Please keep in mind this is a public meeting. It is also being recorded. It is a forum where all are invited to attend. We've got a lot to get through today, a whole lot to get through today. We will go through the governor's homeless emergency declaration. We'll have an update on that. There will be an update on the 60-day housing package. There will be information on a potential liability protection for rural safe resting sites. We're going to talk about zoning and siting preemption bill. There'll be a conversation regarding urban reserves. We'll talk about commercial residential conversions and system development charges, and we'll give an update on the governor's housing bill. We'll pivot away from all things housing and land use, and we'll have information on a public contracting bill, some information on building energy efficiency. We will discuss the drought package that has been proposed, and we'll finish up the day with information on the semiconductor package that's come out this week, as well as some additional information on the Ways and Means Roadshow we talked about last week. So we're going to start this afternoon's conversation with Ariel. Ariel will be talking a lot today. She's got the bulk of the updates related to housing, homelessness, and some of the land use challenges. Ariel, I apologize. I'm on a new system, so if you're on, I can't see you yet. But if you're here and you want to unmute and turn your camera on and give us an update on all things housing and land use, and when you need to take a break or a pause, please do so, because I know you've got a heavy lift right now. So Ariel, please let us know where things stand, housing, land use, and homelessness.
Thanks, Patty, and happy Friday, everybody. There is a lot going on in housing right now, and as we're getting really close to, well, today is a major legislative deadline that bills have to be posted for a work session, meaning a vote today by midnight, or they're effectively dead, at least in that form, for the session. So there's a lot of activity going on. A lot of hearings have been scheduled for the following week. Wanted to start quickly with an update on efforts around the governor's emergency order and the legislative funding package to support that. So as I think most of you know by now, the governor, of course, declared a state of emergency on homelessness, specifically in 7 areas of the state. And she identified a process for additional counties to opt in should they choose. The update from the 7 declared emergency areas is that those areas have established multi-agency coordination groups tasked with developing community plans with specific interventions and funding requests to meet the region's goals for addressing unsheltered homelessness. Oregon Housing and Community Services has been providing technical assistance, including a plan template and a planning workbook to ensure consistency. And so those plans were submitted to the state last week by the MAC groups and are currently under review. And so there's supposed to be more information, including next steps, released today. And then the big news is that 2 additional regions did opt in and were approved to be added to the emergency response. So that's Clatsop County and Mulvihill County. And I just saw an alert. The governor's office just officially announced Mulvihill County a few minutes ago. I understand that Wasco County applied and was denied. And I believe there are at least a few other counties that are still under review, Lincoln County being one of them. In talking to a commissioner from Tillamook County, their understanding was that they were not going to meet the data requirements to apply, otherwise they would have. So conversations are ongoing with the governor's office and with Oregon Housing and Community Services and Oregon Department of Emergency Management. We are getting at this point weekly updates in writing that we're putting into the bulletin, so you can see that today. But happy to take questions on how that all is shaking out at the end of the call. Related to that is the 60-day housing package. Those are the 2 bills moving through the legislature with very strong bipartisan support. So that's House Bill 2001 and House Bill 5019. They passed the House, one passed with a vote of, I think, 50-9 and 49-10. So very strong support there. We expect those to get a vote on the Senate floor early next week. And so that is a pretty large package, includes the funding to support the governor's emergency declaration, funding for those emergency areas, as well as, importantly, additional funding for the remainder of the state, known as the balance of state or rural Oregon continuum of care. We are also working on hopefully getting a discussion and more proactive discussion with the state, with Oregon Housing Community Services and or the governor's office about how those funds might be allocated. There's not a clear framework or plan for those funds yet. And we really want to be working closely to ensure that opportunities for funding for cities is not missed, and that also the state is recognizing the work and the structures already in place through the House Bill 4123 coordinating pilots, and we're hoping to have that conversation with our county partners with the state as well. So that's the update on those pieces. The next topic I can turn over on is wanted to bring on a member as a guest. That's a counselor from the city of Roseburg. Counselor Ellen Porter has been doing amazing advocacy work. Some of you have probably heard from her directly already, and some of you have signed on in support for a concept that would provide some liability protection for rural cities and counties who are looking to set up designated campsites or safe resting areas with some basic amenities provided, sanitation, trash services, restroom services. So Counselor Porter is the very best messenger on this topic because it comes from her community. And I want to turn it over to you, Counselor Porter, to share more information and the opportunity for folks to sign on and support.
Thank you so much, Ariel. Much appreciated. I won't repeat what Ariel said. She gave a really great capsulated summary of what the bill is intended to do. Just to keep in mind with the liability exemption, it does apply to, if passed, it does apply to the balance of state continuum care rural areas. And it does set minimum standards for these designated campgrounds. So they have to have basic sanitation, have certain areas allocated to them or space areas, and have trash service. So it's not a get out of jail free card. So far, we've had fairly strong support for the bill. We have encountered opposition primarily from the Oregon Law Center and the trial attorneys, which I guess isn't surprising. And about a week and a half ago, I sent out emails to roughly 700 or so individuals and organizations asking if they would be willing to sign on and show their support by providing us with a copy of their logo. And this is a very critical time to keep this bill moving. I should say bills moving. And those bills are Senate Bill 847, the -5 amendment, and in the House, it's introduced as House Bill 3591. So we do, like I said, it is a very critical time to keep them moving. And so for the folks who haven't yet responded, but would be willing to sign on, if you could send to me a copy of your logo, we will add it to that one pager. And I will put my phone number and email in the chat. But for those of you that may not have access to the chat, my email is eporter@cityofroseburg.org. And if, as I said, timing is very, very critical. So any folks that would be willing to sign on and include, if possible, the nonprofit organizations in your community, because most of them we found seem to want to support this so that we can try to address this situation, especially in the rural areas where we don't have access to as many resources. So thank you so much. And Ariel, if I missed anything, feel free to fill it in.
Thanks, Ellen. I put a link to the current one pager in the chat. You can see it right there. That's what you would be adding your logo onto. We just need to update it with the House bill number. This is what we submitted to support the Senate version, but they're largely the same concepts. And one of the questions we also have been receiving is whether, the opportunity for this to apply to the whole state. I don't think that's out of the question. I do think that we need to get some quick momentum going on this bill and get it moving. And then we can look and see if there's a possibility to make amendments. So just wanted to note that is not out of the realm of possibility, but we are laser focused on getting this scheduled for a hearing today. And if not, we'll have to amend it into some other bills. So any support you can lend is incredibly helpful. And Councilor Porter did just put her email and phone number in the chat. I'm also happy to connect you if you missed that information. She's also in the bulletin. This bill is linked in the bulletin as well, so you can get her information there. All right, I'm going to turn back to my notes. For the rest of the bills, I just want to flag for you quickly. There we go. So in addition to those pieces that we've already talked about, there are a number of housing development land use related bills scheduled for hearings next week in the housing committees. So I just want to quickly mention a couple just to be aware of these, and the full details are in the bulletin, and just know that these bills are all bills that the LSC is either opposing or directly seeking amendments to. House Bill 3569 is a zoning and siting preemption bill that would require cities to approve housing development basically anywhere in any residential and commercial zone, and would largely preempt any standards or requirements for density, siting and design requirements, ability to plan for adequate infrastructure, among other things. So that is a public hearing on Thursday. And that's the concept. It's been introduced as amendments. It was for a time tagged onto the housing package. It's the home builders concept that's known as right to housing. And we are hopeful that we can continue having conversations with them and with other development stakeholders, because we have some shared goals about increasing housing production. And while this bill is just simply not workable for cities and really wouldn't achieve the goals from cities' perspective, we think that there is some alignment to maybe suggest some alternatives that would achieve those shared goals. So more to come on that. Senate Bill 1051, and there are new -2 amendments that are linked in the bulletin. Would set up a new process where developers would be able to request an urban growth boundary expansion in specific circumstances. We're still reviewing this bill, but the large feedback I've received from most cities is this is also not a workable proposal. So we'll be weighing in on that on Monday. Please feel free to reach out if you have thoughts. We'll be continuing to weigh in on House Bill 2984. This is a bill that we talked about before that that relates to converting existing commercial buildings to residential. And the piece of the bill that is causing the most concern is preemptions on cities' abilities to collect system development charges. The bill now has new draft 3 amendments that are an improvement. We're not sure if they get quite all the way there, but we're hoping to work with the bill sponsor to see if we can continue to improve the bill. And then finally, House Bill 3414 is the governor's housing bill. As introduced, it requires cities to grant variance requests from developers for a wide range of siting and design standards, with denials only allowed if they're to protect public health and safety. This bill is similar to the right to housing bill. It's just overly broad and unworkable for cities. We did provide comprehensive feedback to the governor's office and are expecting to see amendments next week, but no hint on what those will include. The other part of the bill is that it establishes a state housing accountability and production office. This is modeled after a program they have in California. The intent of the office is to provide developers and cities with resources and technical assistance. And it would also accept complaints from developers on city decisions on development projects, and then investigate cities for violations of state and local housing laws. So again, we shared a lot of feedback on that. We'll have updates next week on how that feedback was received and if we see any improvements in a future draft. So there will be future opportunities to weigh in on that. So a lot going on. In a piece of good news, this is not in the bulletin, but our local housing development capacity bill did get scheduled for a work session yesterday, so it is safe from the deadline. We know that bill will have the opportunity to move forward, and it does have a work session next week. So no public hearing, but an opportunity for a vote and to move that out. So if you have the opportunity to contact your legislators with support for that, we'll get that information out to you.
Thank you, Ariel.
It from my end. Happy to take questions at the end.
Yeah, Ariel, I'm going to follow up real quick with you with all these housing bills and some of them seeming to be pretty bad preemptions. Are they going before particular committees that people should be, our members should be targeting in terms of explaining what's workable, what's not workable, where the problems are? Is it too soon for that?
Yeah, so it's specifically, they're being heard in the House Housing and Homelessness Committee. These are the policy committee in the House, and then the Senate Housing and Development Committee and the Senate Policy Committee. So those are largely where these conversations are taking place. For some of the larger topics, for example, the Home Builders Right to Housing Bill, the Speaker's office, the Speaker has shared a commitment to wanting to address some of the goals of the legislation, which are, expediting production, streamlining production, and those are goals that we have committed the Speaker's office that cities are very much at the table to talk about and to share productive ideas. And so that's where we're trying to shift away from the problematic bills and some of the themes in some of the other bills is, the public hearings are happening in the policy committees, but we are also having extensive meetings with leadership staff, with leadership offices about these broader themes and trying to steer towards a more productive path. And I'm incredibly grateful to have an amazing team of city planners and planning directors from cities large and small that we meet regularly on Thursdays. Anyone is welcome to join if you want to dig into the weeds of these bills and get some more of the context, but they're all sharpening their pencils. And we've got a volunteer subcommittee from that group that's putting together some thoughts on how to put together some productive proposals that would actually work for cities and help with the housing production.
Thanks, Ariel. And if people are interested in those Thursday meetings, can they email you directly for some more information?
Yes, that is the best way to find out about those meetings.
And then you said we had some positive news on our housing capacity bill getting a hearing. I think you said, or at least a work session. In case somebody wasn't on the call last week, can you briefly talk about what that bill is and why we consider it to be a positive step forward?
Sure. So House Bill 3174 is a bill that the LOC worked really closely with the Association of Oregon Counties on ahead of session. It has three main parts, and since the bill was introduced, we have combined forces with our partners at the Council of Governments and Economic Development Districts and tribes. So it's a three-part bill. The first part is where we're partnering with the COGS, EDDs, and tribes, and it's expanding that part of the bill to now be a $5 million ask for general technical assistance and capacity resources that would go out statewide and be available to cities for everything from land use planning grants, but also specific assistance with hurdles with development projects, attracting developers, identifying land for building housing. So a range of capacity grant, applying for grant funding, grant management is a key part of that. So that's the first part of the bill. The second part of the bill picks up on some data that the state economist's office put together showing that there is a severe lack of local permitting expertise staff at the development level, whether that's planning, permit approval, building code inspection, public works engineers, but that permit level, inspection level staff is there's an estimation of needing 400 to 500 additional staff at that level across the state. So the second part of the bill is local capacity at that level. And then the third part of the bill would fund and establish a statewide land use education program for both. It would be a position that lived at LOC, but would be in close partnership with AOC and the Department of Land Conservation and Development to establish a curriculum, put together trainings, record them, get out around the state to specifically educate local decision makers on land use. So that's your planning commissioners, city councilors, and county commissioners. And provide some basic land use 101, and then also start to tie into a lot of the legislation that's been passing in recent years or will in this year to help keep cities and counties up to date on the latest in land use law. So I did see a request in the chat. I will put a link to a one-pager describing the bill as well as the bill itself. We are amending it slightly to add in our partners at the COGS and EDDs and tribes, but we are very excited to have that work session on the books next week. I believe it's scheduled for Thursday.
And Ariel, real quickly, that bill number again, one last time is
House Bill 3174, and I'll put a link to the bill and to the one pager in the chat right now.
Thank you, Ariel, for all your work today, giving this update, and generally for all the work you've done on housing and land use this session. Ariel covered a lot, and I know sometimes we're not always crystal clear with restating the bills. So for those of you, really quickly, the liability protection for rural safe resting places is Senate Bill 847 and House Bill 3591. The zoning and siting preemption bill is House Bill 3569. The urban reserve bill is Senate Bill 1051. The commercial to residential conversion and system development charges bill Ariel mentioned is House Bill 2984, and the governor's housing bill is 3414. Again, and if you have any questions about these bills or any other issues related to land use, housing, or homelessness, Ariel Nelson is the person you should talk to, and her email address and contact information is in the chat. You can also always find her on the LOC website. We're going to take a break, probably a needed break from housing and land use here for a second. And I'm going to ask Scott Winkles, who is our general governance lobbyist, to unmute himself and turn his camera on. Scott has updated us many times before on public contracting, particularly Senate Bill 850. And Scott, I think you might have an additional update today. Can you tell the members what's going on with that bill and what they need to know, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Patty. Yeah, we've been talking about Senate Bill 850 for a long time, and I'd hoped that last week would be the last time that this would be on our agenda, unless it was, of course, announcing that it wasn't going to move forward. We thought this is the bill that requires a project labor agreement for public improvements with $750,000 in public funds are valued at that level. The current PLA threshold is $10 million, so this is a considerable change in that requirement. We thought we had this bill wrapped up this week, and it popped onto the calendar. It was taken off. It got popped back on, up for another public hearing. We think that there are votes in play and that this bill is defeatable on the Senate floor and possibly outside of and possibly keep it out of the committee, but it's going to take a fairly substantial effort on the part of the entire public contracting coalition, which includes cities, counties, districts, plus our construction partners, the Associated General Contractors, the material suppliers. All these organizations are activated on the bill. We are certainly encouraging members to talk to their senators. If you are seeing your legislators over the weekend, whether House or Senate, I think this is a good bill to mention. You know, the challenges, and the more the onion layer we peel back on this bill, the more challenging it gets. I think the bill, in all likelihood, constitutes a constitutional unfunded mandate. It certainly constitutes using just a non-legal definition of an unfunded mandate. And the options for cities to deal with this are limited. It's essentially the legislature is basically directing cities to raise their SDCs if they want to complete a construction project or an intended scope. I mean, nothing in the bill changes the amount of money that's available for a project. So I wished I had better news on this bill. It is a challenge, very disappointing when we saw that come back on the calendar. If you haven't talked to your state senators about this bill, we really encourage you to do so. Had a couple technical difficulties with our legislative alert. It's going out right now. So you'll see talking points in the inbox probably before this call is over. So that's the update I have right now on that bill.
Thank you, Scott. And then members can certainly look for the legislative action alert with talking points, but is there particular senators or representatives who might prove pivotal if we can convince them to defeat the bill? Is there people you're particularly interested in having members speak with?
Yeah, you're going to hear a couple of names pretty regularly from us on the Senate side, and those are Woods and Meek. Senator Woods, he's from Wilsonville. I'm not sure if he's still on the Planning Commission in Wilsonville, but he certainly was for a long time, so understands the local perspective. And then Senator Meek from Clackamas, Oregon City area. These members are turning out to be fairly pivotal in the Senate on a number of different issues. So those are the ones that we were, if you have a relationship there, this is a great bill to reach out to them on. Also, Senator Solman is, I think she is receptive to our message on this bill, Hillsborough area, and then any members of the majority caucus that you have a relationship with would be great. But those three I named specifically, and like I said, I think you're going to hear Woods and Meek from us quite a bit before sine die.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate the update. Not necessarily what we want to hear, but it is information we need to share. I'll give you a break as well, Scott. If you don't mind, Nolan, if you're on the line, if you want to unmute yourself and turn your camera on. Nolan Plesha is our lobbyist. He handles a broad portfolio, energy, telecom, broadband. Nolan's going to talk to us today about Senate Bill 870, which is a building energy efficiency bill. Nolan, it's good to see you virtually. What can you tell us and our members today about this particular bill?
Yeah, thank you. So you all might remember in last week's bulletin, we introduced 4 legislative concepts that came out of the Resilient Efficient Buildings Task Force: Senate Bill 868, 869, 870, and 871. Feel free to visit that link that's also in today's bulletin for more information on all those bills. I'll also post the link here in the chat when I'm done speaking. All these bills had an informational hearing and public hearing this week in the Senate Energy and Environment Committee. Amendments have been posted for 3 of the bills, but final amendments based on feedback they have received are still being drafted. We've seen some of the language for those drafts, but have not actually received the final language. So we don't know exactly what is going to be in a final bill. The league supports the goals of these bills, but our main concerns and what we really want to focus on today is about the fiscal impacts for cities with Senate Bill 870. This bill particularly aims to establish a building performance standards for commercial buildings larger than 35,000 square feet to reduce their energy use and climate emissions over time. We are creating a survey that we plan to try to send out on Monday, March 20th, to send out to all of our members, and are asking members to fill it out as soon as possible. The intention of this survey is to understand the true fiscal impacts of Senate Bill 870 and to really capture how many cities have government buildings larger than 35,000 square feet, their age, and what the building is being used for. As example is the building a fire department, police department, library, city hall, community centers, etc. This will really help us to build a better picture of the true impact of this bill for our members. The bill is modeled after a similar policy in Washington State and is in line with the American National Standards Institute standards for energy efficiency in existing buildings. That's definitely a mouthful. Like I mentioned earlier, new amendments are being drafted. Preview of changes shows that they will create 2 tiers to meet these performance standards. Local government buildings and commercial buildings will be in tier 1, while tier 2 will include hospitals, schools, dormitories, and university buildings. Parking garages that are connected to buildings will be excluded from determining the square footage. The Department of Energy will also have the authority to create new incentive programs to provide financial and technical assistance for building owners, along with other federal and state incentives. The proponents hope that this will help to reduce the costs to make these upgrades for affordable, to make them more affordable for building owners in cities. They are also allowing for phased implementation in which eligible building owners do not need to replace a system or equipment before the useful life of the system or equipment ends. However, while incentives and phased implementations are helpful, they also do not cover the full costs of these energy efficient upgrades. As examples, replacing windows or insulation are not considered systems or equipment. So again, we will be creating a survey that we will send out on Monday, March 20th, and we are hoping that each of you and other members will fill that out and get it back to us as soon as possible. We again, don't necessarily oppose the goals of this concept, but we really do have concerns about, once again, having to ask cities to cover additional costs, considering how varying challenges that you all are facing, and the expectation that more asks of cities will come before the end of the session. This will help us to paint a real picture of the impact to city budgets. And we appreciate any help you all can have in getting this information to us. This is a Senate and House Democratic Caucus priority as their big environmental package this session, so we do expect it to move forward. But again, we really want to ensure that legislators really understand what they're asking of our cities by creating additional asks with SB 870.
Thanks, Nolan. And I know you've said a couple of times that you're asking the members to fill out the survey on Monday ASAP. Can you give a ballpark? Are we asking for it like in a week, 72 hours? What are we? I just lost lights and it's not my room, so I don't know why. So I apologize. We'll try and figure that out. But there we go. Can you let us know, is ASAP with like 24-hour turnaround, a week turnaround? Do you have a sense of what you're looking for?
Yeah, so I was also talking with Ariel about this. I think we will have at least a little bit of time. Once these bills do pass in the package, it will have to go to the full Ways and Means Committee. So we do have a little bit of time to compile this information. I think what we would ask is probably by the end of the week, just so it gives us enough time to really put this information together. I don't know when a work session is going to be scheduled. Again, they still have to finish the final amendments. I don't know if they're going to actually do a separate public hearing to hear those amendments. We'll see. But they will be asking cities for a fiscal impact on that, and we'll be ready to at least respond initially. But then once it's in Ways and Means, we really hope to have a full identified fiscal for what kind of impact this is going to have on our communities.
Excellent. Thank you, Nolan. And just to kind of reiterate what Nolan said, if you get that survey or someone on staff gets that survey on Monday, you would do yourselves and us a lot of help in kind of showing what this actual unfunded mandate will mean for you and your communities. So Nolan, thank you for the update. Thanks again for all the work you've been doing this session on all of the bills you've been working on. I'm going to pivot and I'm going to ask Michael Martin. Michael does our water and wastewater infrastructure type packages for the league. Michael, it's my understanding we had a drought package in House Bill 3124 drop, I think late last week, if not early this week. The days have blurred, I'm sorry. But if you can give us an update on where that things stand and what's in that package, it would be helpful.
Absolutely. So House Bill 3124, as Patty mentioned, had an informational hearing in House Ag, Land Use, Water, and Natural Resources Committee on Thursday. And the chair of that committee and the vice chair, Representative Helm and Representative Owens, respectively, gave effectively their first presentation of what is a $250 million package. There's a lot in it. I think, and I do have a bulletin article to kind of go over. It goes over briefly what we support, but I think it's worth noting for this package because it's got a high dollar amount, what it is not as well. So it is not a rewrite of Western water law, and it does not change the way that drought is declared in our state. And while there are a lot of water bills this session, not all of them are in the drought package. And I think that it's important to highlight that that doesn't mean that they're not important. And for our purposes, what was included in the drought package were two priorities that came out of our water, wastewater policy committee. And that is ratepayer assistance. So initially, this was a one-time federal funding program that helped folks pay their water bill. We've demonstrated an incredible need. There's a $15 million allocation in the drought package as part of that. I think as time goes on this legislative session and things are, scaled back, whittled away, very important to emphasize to your legislators how important it is to keep this in the package, in the drought package. And the other piece that came out of our policy committee priorities is place-based planning. And what this effectively does is it extends place-based planning. And this really allows us to take a local approach, basin by basin, determining water needs, where things need to change. So these are two priorities that got in the drought package that are really good, and we'd like to see them stay in there throughout the process. So that's it. That's what I have on the drought package.
And Michael, I think you mentioned this at the top, but you have a bulletin article on this that maybe spells out things a little bit more clearly, because it's a pretty dense package, if I remember correctly. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, and I linked to the hearing, but I really highlight those again, the ratepayer assistance program that's in the drought package and the place-based planning. And of course, happy to field any questions, but those are pieces that we want to see stay in the package as it goes. Again, very dynamic process, as the legislature has to make those ultimate budget decisions, but two very important pieces in it.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for all your work on this as well. We're going to finish today with the primary update from our lobbyist with Jim McCauley. Jim's our legislative director. He's been running point on our semiconductor proposal. He's also been getting a lot of work and assistance and help from another one of our lobbyists, Lindsay Tennis. I don't know if Lindsay's joining you today, Jim, but Jim's definitely going to at least take the lead, give us an update on where things stand with semiconductors. How's it look, Jim?
Well, part of it passed through this week. So Senate Bill 4 has been the primary, I'll say what's been referred to as the semiconductor package. It unfortunately is coming up short in a number of pieces. And what we've described here in the past is we have been pushing from before the session and certainly throughout time to make sure that we get all of the sunset extensions related to economic development extended as part of this deal. We also were part of a coalition that was supporting the addition of funding for industrial site readiness, as well as an important research and development tax credit. So all of the incentive pieces are not in this package at this point. What is in it, and I don't want to overshadow the significance of it because it is important. So roughly $210 million has been physically allocated in Senate Bill 4 for use in a couple of different areas, primarily focused in on, I'll say, site readiness, some infrastructure and things of that nature, as well as some workforce development and some university funding. There's still a lot more details that are going to need to be worked out of it, but there is that financial component that's been taken care of. The other element here is really the land use piece. This is really a critical element that was identified by the task force that had spent roughly 16 months of work in advance of session, identifying recommendations in terms of going forward. The reason being is that under Oregon's land use system, in order to get a piece of land sited and a shovel in the ground to take on a major construction such as a new chip facility, that's not measured in months. That's more about measured in years. And under the CHIPS Act, we don't have years. We roughly have a 16 to 24 month period. And the companies who are going to be applying for some of that federal CHIPS Act money are going to need to have some certainty that what they're applying for is actually going to turn out to be an investment down the road. So the short piece or the short answer on the land use for what's in the bill is executive power has been provided to the governor. The preference from, I'll say, the attorney side of this thing, or the recommendations from the business community here, was to not give it gubernatorial executive power, but to essentially name physical sites in the bill. That would have cut out the legal process substantially. But going forward, this is effectively what we have. There's a couple of other steps that this bill is going to have to take. It'll be sitting in Ways and Means here in the next few weeks. And they'll be determining what additional adjustments they need to make on the financial side for it. Our efforts from this point forward really will be in Lindsay's camp. That's going to be a lot of that economic development piece, both in terms of enterprise zones as well as SIP gain share, and trying to, again, still work within the coalition. So happy to see if Lindsay has any other comments and stuff that she would like to offer.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yeah, and again, as we've said before, I think there was the thought that enterprise zones, SIP gain share, and then regionally significant industrial site program, and then funding for that program would be considered as part of the semiconductor package. I think we've gotten pretty clear signal from leadership that at least enterprise zones and SIP and gain share will not be considered as part of that package, and will instead be considered in the Joint Committee on Tax Expenditures. And some of those sunsets sit in that committee already. And then some program changes have subsequent referrals to that committee. So yeah, we're still very dedicated to making sure that we maintain these programs, whether or not they're connected to semiconductor, and you've heard us say that before. And then I guess, the other thing is to note on enterprise zones, and this information is not in the bulletin, so I apologize that there's nothing to point back to. But I think, there are some bills that make changes to enterprise zones, and Jim and I will be sort of consulting a group of our economic development folks as those changes get considered. So if you want to be part of that group, shoot me an email. I'll put my email in the chat. But really just want to make sure that we are talking to, our city managers, economic development staff who are running these programs on the ground, so that we can get more perspective. So yeah, shoot me an email if you want to be part of that group.
Great, thank you. Patty, do you want me to move straight into just another quick plug for this Ways and Means Roadshow?
Yeah. I've got two quick questions if I could, real specifically. So just out of curiosity, we know, and you both have said that like enterprise zones and SIP and all of those are not going to be in the semiconductor package, and that they're going to, I think, Lindsay, I heard you saying, go before the Joint Committee on Tax Expenditures. Just generally speaking, are we still comfortable as the league that we have a realistic chance still of getting those renewed? Are they still very much live through the rest of session?
Yes, I believe so. And I think, these sunset extensions have come up before. Enterprise zones have been enacted since 1985, and the sunset extensions, I will say every time they have come up before the legislature up to this point, the legislature has chosen to renew these programs. I think that there is strong support in the legislature for maintaining these programs. There is some hesitancy about, I guess, there's some Oregonian articles about how these programs have been used and who has benefited from them. But I feel confident in saying that there is support in extending the sunsets and maintaining the programs. Jim, would you say the same?
Yeah, I do. I think there's some edge stuff for us to be concerned about. I mean, we want, as an example, we want 10-year extensions. That's what they have done in the past. That helps provide a pretty high level of certainty to the business community, as well as Commerce Department, in terms of evaluation of these semiconductor applications that they're going to be getting. We don't want to have something short of that. So that's kind of an example. There is certainly an interest in getting these things renewed, but we got to make sure that we've got a timeline in there that makes some sense. And then if there are any other adjustments, we don't want to break up a program that works very well and has been shown to have success in many communities, including a lot of small communities that are out there, because this isn't just about a semiconductor component here. These are incentive packages that are basically allowing communities to attract anything from banks to bakeries to everything kind of in between. So one of the things that Lindsay has been working on is to make sure that all of our members out there who have got these E-zones take the time to communicate with their legislators and make sure that they understand how important these E-zones are, and to be able to call out some of your projects that you have been able to show where those E-zones have had some value, both in terms of job creation, but also any number of other benefits and stuff to the communities.
Thank you. And then Lindsay, just to kind of re-elevate what you said, if we have some people who are really the persons on staff or on a council who are working on those enterprise zones specifically and know the nuances, if they have questions or want to be helpful to you, they can email you directly for some additional information on some bills. Did I hear you say that?
Yes. Yes. And I think, yeah, it would be helpful for me if you can reach out just so I know who, is most closely working with these programs so that we have the best information to provide to legislators as they're considering any changes to them.
Wonderful. Okay, Jim, I know there are some questions in both the chat and with their hands raised, but as always, we're going to save those until the end. We've got one last update, Jim. I think that's from you on the Ways and Means Roadshow. If you can give us an update on that, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, super. So just a quick heads up again, we mentioned it last week. This is budget season right now. The Ways and Means Committee will be going on a roadshow starting in April. And they're going to be visiting, I'll just say 3 different areas outside the Portland area. So Saturday, April 8th, 10 a.m. to noon, will be in Portland. Friday, April 14th, they'll be in Newport from 5 to 7 p.m. On Friday, April the 21st, they'll be in Roseburg from 5 to 7 p.m. And on Friday, April 28th, they'll be in Ontario from 5 to 7 p.m. So they're trying to get around to the rest of the state. This is a perfect opportunity for every community that is within I'll say a short drive or maybe a half day's drive there in some of these locations. This gives you your opportunity to pitch what's important to you. The league itself will be preparing some budget priorities as far as requests, and those will effectively mirror a lot of our priorities that we've got going into this session. And we'll be submitting that and making that available to members here in the next couple of weeks. So this kind of goes in tune with really how that legislative process works, and you can at least have a role in helping them decide what's important in your community. And hopefully at the end of the day, we see some adjustments as a result of this roadshow.
Thanks for that update, Jim. And again, just to elevate, if you're in the area or it's close, please make sure to take a look at those dates and see if you can make it work. That's the end of our primary update. We've got some questions in the chat and some people with their hand raised. I'm going to go in the order in which I noticed them. Hopefully that is in fact the correct order. So Michael, I think this first question is from you. It's coming from the city manager of Cresswell, Michelle Omberg. The question is, does the financial assistance program in the drought package allow agencies to be reimbursed for the administrative cost, or do all of the monies go to paying utility bills? Michael, can you handle that one?
Yes, and I put it in the chat, and I'll just reemphasize that the program guidelines authorize full payment of arrearages only. So on this just high level, that one-time federal funding, it went out through community action agencies. The water utilities, they would say, here's our, or someone would come in with a need, and these arrearages would actually be taken care of by individualized contract to the water utility. So it goes directly to the water utility, that payment.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. Nolan, I think the next question I saw is going to come to you. It's from the Milwaukee Mayor, Mayor Beatty. The question is, does Senate Bill 870 require cities to be the enforcer of this vis-a-vis commercial and other non-city buildings?
No, ODO will be the one that will be enforcing it. Building owners will be required to submit reports directly to ODO every 5 years. Cities will be considered building owners for their respective buildings, and then commercial building owners will be responsible for their own reporting. I also added in the chat that one thing we have learned, but we have not confirmed because we haven't seen any language for the new amendments, is that they do plan to exempt residential or multifamily housing from this requirement. So again, we don't have confirmation on that because we haven't seen any actual amendment language, but I did want to at least flag that piece.
And then just In recognition that not everybody may know acronyms, ODO is.
Thank you. The Oregon Department of Energy. That's a problem we sometimes have in this world. We speak in too many acronyms. So thanks for clarifying.
Nope, thanks for doing it. We'll all get there one day. We'll all have the same speak. Mayor McCardle, I'm going to skip your question because I think that Lindsay already answered it in enterprise zones. If I'm wrong and I didn't get you covered, please put a note in the chat and yell at me telling me to go back and do it again. And then it looks like Councillor Peter Hall of Haynes has his hand raised. Councillor Hall, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, I was wondering if there is some consideration for when it comes to the enterprise zones and economic incentives, if maybe you could sell the fact that we can make it in some communities really need it. We can go ahead and have a lot of economic incentives because you really need the development. And maybe some other places, they don't really need it, like the Portland metro area. I mean, you've got high real estate prices, and maybe you don't need as much development there. And to get someplace like a Coos Bay, they want to get in development. They need to have the economic development. So can we make it so that some places that really need the economic development will get more incentives than other places, especially like the Portland area?
Lindsay, you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I would say, so at least when it comes to enterprise zones, that aspect is already built into the program, because in the regular enterprise zone program, it's a 3 to 5 year property tax abatement. And then in the long-term rural enterprise zone program, it's between 7 and 15 years. And that longer tax abatement is really there to provide an extra incentive for rural communities to attract that development. And so, yeah, part of our goal will be, maintaining greater incentives for rural communities, knowing that it's harder to attract that development and not wanting to take away tools that those communities have.
I was going to add one more piece to this too, if I could. Go ahead, Peter. I'm sorry.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay.
Jim, Councillor Hall, I think you're cutting in and out. I'm going to go ahead and ask Jim to just state what he was going to elevate in the conversation.
Yeah, the piece that is always important for us whenever we're working on legislation is we don't want to put ourselves in the position of picking winners and losers between cities. So I want to make sure that folks understand that around the table here. And Lindsay's exactly right. The way that structure is in place for enterprise zones, it's already structured in there that those urban communities are effectively looking at something different than the rural. And having been around when the rural was put together back in 2015 or so, I was at Washington County at the time. It was pretty clear at that point that standard enterprise zone was not helping the rural parts of the state. And the whole point of having a rural one was to make sure that you could attract those investments and reinvestments. And it's a program that has taken off, and it has really worked for a lot of the communities who have had those opportunities and stuff come forward.
Thank you, both of you, both Jim and Lindsay, for that update. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, including Mayor McCardle telling me I did not read the room correctly and get his question answered earlier. Nor am I seeing other hands raised. We're about 7 minutes out from 2:30, which is our stopping point. In case anybody does have any questions, I will take a few seconds to update you on some other issues or rather events. We've said this at every legislative webinar, but just a reminder that we will be doing our 2-day spring conference, April 25th and 26th at the Seaside Convention Center. Registration is still open for that event, but please remember our spring conferences are smaller than the annual conference, which means that space is generally limited as well as hotel capacity. So if you're someone who is still thinking of attending that conference and you have not yet registered to do so, I would encourage you to do so as soon as possible to guarantee your spot. There's information on the League's main website about that. For those of you who aren't familiar, that's www.orcities.org. President Steve Calloway, who is in the room with me the first time we've done this together, in the room, is still hosting regional meetings where he is advising members and taking feedback on the Board of Directors' recently adopted strategic plan. We have 7 more regions to visit over the next 2 to 3 months. If you've not yet registered to attend a meeting in your particular region, please consider doing so. You can also find those on our website. I have not seen any questions, and I recognize that we are all busy. It is Friday afternoon, so I will assume that we are updated and good to go. Thank you all for what you do for your cities. Thank you for what you do to support the League of Oregon Cities. And I hope you all have a wonderful Friday. Thank you.